The moment the crystal in front of me turns black, 3,000 people start laughing at the same time. I'm standing on the ascension platform, arms still raised, fingers still glowing faintly from where I touched the altar of judgment. Everyone around me has a class hovering above their head in shining gold letters: Knight, Battle Mage, Sky Archer. Even the kid who fainted twice during training got Apprentice Healer. And me? Nothing. Just a black crystal and a system message that reads "No class detected," floating there for the entire kingdom to see. My mother's in the crowd. I don't look at her. I can't. Right then, Bastian Voss, the golden son of the most powerful merchant knight family in the capital, steps up beside me and says the words that are going to follow me for the rest of my life. Guess the great hero's son turned out to be nothing after all. The crowd roars. Somewhere behind him, Celine, the girl I grew up next to, the girl I used to share bread with when neither of our families had enough, looks away. Not at me. Away. That should have been the worst moment of my life. It wasn't even close. Because 3 seconds later, while I'm still standing there humiliated in front of everyone who ever mattered to me, the black crystal cracks down the middle. Not shatters. Cracks. Slow and deliberate. Like something inside it is waking up after a very long sleep. A sound rolls out of it that isn't a sound at all, more like a pressure behind my eyes, and the new words burn themselves into the sky above the platform in a color none of us have ever seen before. Not gold, not silver. A deep, furious red, like dried blood catching fire. Hidden class detected. Sovereign of Ash. Rank unclassified. Threat level sealed. The laughing stops. I had no idea, standing there with my heart slamming against my ribs, that I had just unlocked something that hadn't existed in this kingdom for 400 years. Something the old records were ordered burned, something that got an entire bloodline erased so it would never happen again. All I knew, in that exact second, was that the pain in my chest wasn't humiliation anymore. It was heat. Real, physical heat, crawling up from my heart into my throat, like my blood had decided to catch fire from the inside. My name is Riven Ashcroft, and this is the day everyone decided I was worthless, right before I became the single most dangerous person in the kingdom of Vermont. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the part before it. 17 years ago, my father was the strongest knight commander the capital had ever produced. Men still talk about him in taverns, like he's a legend instead of a person, because he died stopping a demon incursion that would have wiped out half the northern provinces. He never got to see me grow up. All I got from him were stories, a training sword that was too heavy for me until I turned 14, and a reputation I never asked for. Everyone expected the son of the hero to awaken something incredible. A knight class, at minimum. Maybe something rarer, if the old blood ran strong enough. Instead, I spent 6 years training every single day, pushing my body past the point most kids my age would even attempt, because I refused to be the failure everyone quietly expected once they found out my mother couldn't afford a private tutor like the noble families could. I trained in secret before school. I trained after. My knuckles were permanently split for 2 years straight. And on the day it mattered most, the altar looked into my soul and decided I had nothing worth naming. That's the setup. Now here's the part that changes everything. The system that just detonated over my head isn't a class anyone in the crowd recognizes, but it turns out the old instructors do. I can see it happen in real time, the exact moment 3 of the senior examiners go pale at the same time, like they've just watched a grave get dug up in front of them. One of them, an ancient woman named Instructor Halvain, who has taught at this academy for probably 40 years, drops the ceremonial staff she's holding. It clatters against the stone platform, and the sound is somehow louder than anything Bastian just said. "That's not possible," she whispers, except she's standing close enough that I hear every word. That bloodline was supposed to be gone. I don't get to ask what she means, because that's the exact moment the pain hits for real. It feels like every vein in my body has been filled with molten iron all at once. I drop to one knee on the platform, and the crowd that was laughing 30 seconds ago goes dead silent, because now this isn't funny anymore. Now it looks like something's actually killing me in front of everyone. My vision goes red at the edges. A voice that is not mine, ancient and low and impossibly calm, speaks directly inside my skull, like it's been waiting behind a locked door for 400 years. and someone finally handed it the key. Finally, the voice says, a vessel who didn't burn out in the first minute. Interesting. I black out before I can ask who's talking. When I wake up, I'm not on the platform anymore. I'm in the Academy's isolation ward, the room they use for students who react badly to their awakening, which almost never happens anymore because most classes are mild enough not to cause physical damage. My mother's sitting by the bed, and the look on her face isn't disappointment, it's fear. Real fear, the kind I've never seen on her before, not even the day they told her my father wasn't coming home. They want to test you again, she says quietly. Officials from the Crown showed up an hour ago. That's when I understand this isn't just embarrassing anymore. This is dangerous. Here's the piece nobody bothered to explain to a 17-year-old about to inherit the most feared power in the kingdom's history. 4 centuries ago, a warlord known only as the Ashen King nearly burned the entire continent to cinders using a class called Sovereign of Ash, a power built on consuming the failed potential of everyone around him, turning humiliation and despair into raw, unstoppable strength. He wasn't stopped by an army, he was stopped by betrayal, sealed inside his own bloodline by a ritual so extreme that every historical record about the class was supposed to be destroyed afterward. Every single descendant of that line was hunted down over the following century until the Crown officially declared the bloodline extinct. Except it wasn't extinct, it was hiding. And apparently it had been hiding inside me the entire time, waiting for a moment desperate enough to crack the seal, which is exactly what a public humiliation in front of 3,000 people turned out to be. I had no idea, lying in that hospital bed, that the officials outside weren't there to help me. They were there to decide whether I lived through the week. The voice in my head introduces itself while my mother steps out to argue with the guards, stationed at my door. It calls itself Vos Kaelmarrow, and no, before you ask, that's not a name I'm keeping around for long because it turns out to be the actual Ashen King himself, or at least what's left of him, compressed into a fragment of consciousness bound to the class he created. He's furious, sarcastic, and apparently just as surprised as I am that his bloodline produced someone worth talking to after 400 years of failed vessels, who either rejected the class outright or died trying to control it. You're going to want to listen carefully, he tells me, because the people outside that door are already deciding how to make you disappear quietly. Great. Just great. I get the strongest class in recorded history, and my first reward is a death sentence. The officials interrogate me for 6 straight hours. They ask about my father, about my training, about whether anyone in my bloodline ever mentioned the Ashen King's name. I tell them the truth, which is nothing, because I genuinely had no idea any of this existed until an hour ago. Eventually they leave with a warning instead of a verdict. I'm to be monitored. If the class shows any sign of instability, if I lose control even once, they will not hesitate to remove the threat permanently. Removing the threat is their polite way of saying execution, and everyone in that room knows it, including me. I should have been terrified. Honestly, mostly I was, but underneath the fear, something else was building. Something that felt a lot like the first real advantage I'd ever had in my entire life. Word travels fast in a kingdom this small, and by the next morning at Solmere Academy, everyone knows 2 things. First, that Riven Ashcroft somehow awakened a class powerful enough to make the Crown send officials in the middle of the night. Second, that nobody actually knows what the class does yet, which turns every single person who used to ignore me into someone watching my every move like I'm a bomb that hasn't gone off. Bastion doesn't back down though. If anything, the attention makes him worse. Sealed threat level, he says to a group of his friends in the training yard, loud enough for me to hear on purpose. That's not a compliment. That means even the system is scared of what a failure like you might do with it. He picked the wrong week to keep talking, because that afternoon, during mandatory sparring drills, the Academy pairs me against him specifically. I find out later this wasn't an accident. Instructor Halvain arranged it deliberately, worried enough about what I might be capable of, that she wanted a controlled demonstration in front of trained supervisors, rather than an uncontrolled one somewhere unsupervised. At the time, all I know is that I'm standing across from the person who humiliated me in front of the entire kingdom yesterday, and something in my chest is finally ready to answer back. Bastion's class is Battle Lord, a strong, aggressive melee type that hits like a landslide. He's fast, well-trained, and has been coasting on natural talent his entire life without ever needing to fight for it the way I did. He comes at me expecting an easy win, the same easy win he's gotten against me in sparring for 6 years straight. The moment his fist connects with my guard, something in my body changes without my permission. Ash, actual gray-black ash, curling off my skin like smoke from something burning, and where it touches his armor, the metal starts corroding, eating away at the enchantments layered into it like acid on paper. He staggers back, confused, and I watch his confidence crack for the first time in his life. Voss's voice slides into my head again, calm and amused now instead of urgent. "There it is," he says. "The class feeds on decay. His arrogance just became your fuel." I don't fully understand what that means yet, not in the moment, but my body seems to. Every ounce of humiliation Bastion has ever handed me, every laugh from that crowd yesterday, every second of feeling worthless, it's not gone. It's fuel, and right now, for the first time in my life, I have somewhere to put it. I close the distance before he recovers his footing, and for one single, perfect second, I catch a look on his face that I've been waiting 6 years to see. Fear. The supervisors call the match before it goes any further, worried about what happens if it escalates. And honestly, that's probably the right call, because I'm not sure I would have stopped myself. Bastion storms off without a word, which is the loudest silence he's ever given me. Celine watches the whole thing from the sidelines, and this time she doesn't look away. That night, she finds me by the training grounds after everyone else is gone. "I didn't know," she says quietly, "about the class, about any of it." I want to believe her. Some stubborn, exhausted part of me still cares whether she believes in me at all, which honestly annoys me more than it should. Voss unhelpfully mutters something in my head about vessels who let old feelings compromise a perfectly good advantage. I ignore him. For now, the next few days are strange in a way I don't have a word for yet. Nobody at the academy laughs at me anymore, but they don't exactly talk to me either. Instead, I get the other thing, the thing that's honestly almost worse. People go quiet when I walk into a room. Conversations stop halfway through. Kids who wouldn't look at me a week ago now watch me from across the courtyard like I might combust at any second. And maybe, given how the sparring match went, they're not entirely wrong to be careful. Instructor Halvain pulls me into her office 2 days after the Bastion match, and I brace myself for a lecture. Instead, she slides a folder across her desk, thick with pages that look decades old, edges browned and brittle. "If you're going to carry that bloodline," she says, "you should at least know what you're carrying." Inside are fragments of records the Crown never managed to fully destroy, smuggled out and hidden by Academy staff generations ago, who apparently didn't trust their own government to make good decisions about dangerous knowledge. Most of it is useless to me, burned or water-damaged past reading, but one page survives mostly intact, a hand-drawn diagram of the sovereign of Ash-class tree, showing abilities I haven't even touched yet. Voss goes very still in my head while I read it. "I forgot some of that even existed," he admits quietly, which is somehow more unsettling than anything he's said so far. If a 400-year-old warlord is surprised by his own power, that's not exactly reassuring for the 17-year-old currently hosting him. That night I try, for the first time on purpose instead of by accident, to actually understand what the class can do beyond corroding armor and terrifying bullies. Voss walks me through it while I sit alone in the training yard well past curfew, and it turns out Sovereign of Ash isn't really about destruction at all, not at its core. It's about absorption, failure, decay, despair. Anything discarded or broken, the class can pull it in and turn it into fuel, which explains why it woke up specifically in the one moment of my life that handed it the most raw material it had ever seen. It also explains, chillingly, why the Ashen King became what he became. An entire kingdom's worth of suffering, poured into one vessel with no boundaries, for years. I decide right then, sitting alone in the dark with ash curling lazily off my fingertips, that I am not going to be a vessel with no boundaries. Word of the sparring match reaches further than the academy walls faster than I expect, and 3 days later I get proof of exactly how far. A courier delivers a summons, not from the Crown this time, but from the Adventurers Guild, requesting my presence to help contain a hollow creature that's wandered out of a smaller, unmapped fracture near the eastern farmland district. Normally, a request like this wouldn't go anywhere near a 17-year-old academy student, hidden class or not. But the guildmaster, it turns out, has heard about the Voss family's confiscation petition too, and she's decided a public witness demonstration works in everyone's favor if I actually manage to survive it. This is a test, Voss says as I pack my gear that night. Not from the council, from everyone who's still deciding whether you're a monster or a weapon. They can point at their enemies. Choose which one you show them very carefully. The creature turns out to be smaller than what we faced in the actual rift, but it's fast, vicious, and already killed 2 farmhands by the time I arrive with a small team of guild adventurers who clearly don't trust me yet and keep their distance the entire ride out. I understand why. I'd be nervous around me too. But something shifts the moment the fight actually starts, because this time, I'm not fighting out of rage or desperation. I'm fighting with a plan, drawing on the class deliberately instead of letting it drown me. And it shows. The creature goes down in under 4 minutes, and I walk away from the fight barely winded, ash settling around my boots instead of pouring off me like smoke. The adventurers who kept their distance on the way out don't keep their distance on the way back. One of them, a rough-edged older woman named Sarah, who's clearly seen more battlefields than academy exams, claps me on the shoulder hard enough to stagger me and says, "Kid, whatever the crown's scared of, I'm a lot more scared of what happens if they take that power away from someone who actually knows how to use it right." It's not exactly a compliment. It might be the closest thing to respect I've gotten from a stranger in my entire life, and it lands harder than I expect it to. News of the Eastern District incident spreads through the capital within a day, and for the first time since the awakening ceremony, the story people tell about me isn't just about the crack in the crystal. It's about the fight after it. That should have been good news. It should have made things easier. Then I heard it. The rumor that changes everything. Whispered by a market vendor to another vendor while I'm walking home. Not even meant for me to hear at all. Someone matching a description that sounds uncomfortably like a robed stranger has been asking questions around the lower district taverns. Questions about a boy who awakened a sealed class. Questions about where he lives, where he trains, who he cares about. Not the crown's people. Not the Voss family's people either. Based on the description. Someone else entirely. I bring it straight to Voss that night, half expecting him to brush it off the way he brushes off most things that don't immediately threaten my survival. He doesn't. "There were 7 of them," he says slowly, and for the first time I hear something in his voice that sounds almost like guilt. 7 who swore loyalty to the crown I wore, back before everything fell apart. I assumed they died with everyone else who tried to protect what I built. I assumed a lot of things apparently that turned out to be wrong. Great. So it's not just the government and a jealous noble family after me anymore? There might be an entire cult of 400-year-old loyalists out there who just found out their king's bloodline is walking around again, and I have absolutely no idea what they want from me, or how far they're willing to go to get it. I should have told Instructor Halvain immediately. I should have told the guildmaster, or my mother, or literally anyone with more experience navigating political nightmares than a 17-year-old who's had a hidden class for less than 2 weeks. Instead, stubborn as always, I decide to handle it quietly. The same way I handled 6 years of training in secret before anyone thought I was worth teaching properly. That decision is going to come back to bite me harder than almost anything else in this entire story, but I don't know that yet. What I don't know yet, standing there in the dark with Celine, is that Bastion's family isn't the kind of family that lets a public humiliation slide quietly. Voss family pride runs generations deep, and by the next morning, his father, a council-ranked noble with real political weight, has petitioned the crown directly, demanding my class be classified as an unregistered threat and confiscated through forced seal binding, a ritual that would strip the power out of me completely, and which historically has about a 40% survival rate for the vessel. They're not trying to punish me anymore. They're trying to erase what happened on that platform, and the easiest way to erase it is to erase the class before it gets stronger than they can control. I find out about the petition from Instructor Halvain, of all people, who pulls me aside after class with a look on her face I can't quite place, somewhere between pity and something sharper. "You have maybe a week," she tells me, "before the council votes. If it passes, they'll bind the class whether you consent or not." She hesitates, then adds something I don't expect. "Your father would have fought this the same way he fought everything, head on, no hesitation, and completely reckless about his own safety in the process. That's the first time anyone has compared me to him and meant it as something other than an insult. I spend that night not sleeping, running the numbers over and over. A week to prove that Sovereign of Ash isn't the threat everyone's terrified of. Or a week to figure out how to survive if they come to bind it anyway. Voss, to his credit, actually has a suggestion instead of a smug comment for once. There's a trial, he tells me. The Hollow Rift, 3 days south of the capital. A tear in the world left over from the war I started, still crawling with the kind of monsters that don't officially exist in your history books because your kingdom prefers to pretend they cleaned it up completely. Clear it, publicly, with witnesses who can't be bought by the Voss family, and the council has to acknowledge the class as an asset instead of a liability. Or I could die there, I say. Or that, he agrees, with absolutely zero comfort in his voice. But you're going to die here anyway if you do nothing. At least this way it's a choice. He's not wrong, and that's the worst part. I had no choice that felt like an actual choice, not really. So the next morning I request an emergency leave from the academy under the guise of a family matter, which nobody questions because everyone's still too nervous around me to ask follow-up questions, and I head south alone. I'm not alone for long. Celine catches up to me half a day into the journey, riding a horse she clearly stole from her family's stable, out of breath and furious in that specific way she gets when she's decided something and doesn't want to hear arguments about it. You're not doing this by yourself, she says, before I even get a word out. You never let anyone help you with anything, and it's the most infuriating thing about you, and I'm not letting you die alone in some rift because you're too stubborn to say you're scared. I open my mouth to argue. Voss, inside my head, sighs like he's already exhausted by both of us. I decide arguing isn't worth the effort and let her come. We reach the Hollow Rift 2 days later, and even from a distance, it's wrong in a way that words don't quite capture. The sky above it doesn't move right. The air tastes like rust, and crawling out from the fracture in reality are things that used to be animals, twisted into something with too many limbs and mouths that don't close all the way. This is what my father died fighting 17 years ago, and standing at the edge of it now, I finally understand exactly how much he sacrificed to keep this contained for as long as he did. The plan is simple on paper. Clear a path to the rift's core, seal the primary fracture using an artifact instructor Halvain smuggled to me the night before I left, which she absolutely was not supposed to do, and which will get her in serious trouble if anyone finds out, and get out before the whole thing collapses. Simple on paper. Nothing about the next 6 hours goes according to that paper. The first wave of hollow creatures hits us within 20 minutes. And this is where I learn what Sovereign of Ash actually costs to use. Every time I draw on the power, it doesn't just burn my enemies, it burns something in me too. Feeding on my own exhaustion, my own pain, converting it into strength that keeps climbing the longer the fight goes on, and the worse I feel. It's brilliant and it's horrifying in equal measure, because the better this class works, the closer it pushes me toward collapsing completely. Celine fights beside me the entire way, her class turning out to be something nobody at the academy ever gave her credit for either, a rare bloodward mystic that lets her read and redirect incoming damage in ways that keep both of us alive, through fights that should have killed us twice over. I start to understand, somewhere in the middle of that rift, that everyone who ever underestimated either of us was going to regret it eventually. We reach the core exactly as the sun starts going down, and that's when the real problem shows up. The fracture isn't stable. It hasn't been stable this whole time, and the artifact Halvain gave me isn't strong enough to seal it on its own, not against something this deteriorated after 400 years of neglect. What crawls out of the widening tear isn't another hollow creature. It's something that used to be human once, corrupted so far past recognition that the only thing left recognizable about it is the crown still fused into what's left of its skull. Voss goes completely silent in my head for the first time since he woke up. That, he finally says, and his voice has lost every trace of its usual sarcasm, is what happens to a vessel of this class who loses control completely. That is what I almost became before they sealed me. Great. So the thing standing between us and getting out of here alive is a 400-year-old warning label wearing a crown. The fight that follows is the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, and I mean that with every ounce of exhaustion currently screaming through my body. The corrupted thing hits harder than anything I've faced, moves faster than I can track half the time, and every attack it lands doesn't just hurt, it corrodes, eating away at whatever it touches the same way my own ash does to enemies, except turned up to a level that makes my version look like a campfire next to a wildfire. Celine takes a hit meant for me at one point, gets thrown 30 feet, and doesn't get back up right away. And something in my chest that isn't fear and isn't rage, but some combination neither word quite covers, finally snaps loose completely. I stop holding back. I don't fully remember the next 2 minutes. What I do remember, in fragments, is Voss's voice screaming something about control, about how this is exactly the moment that broke him 400 years ago, exactly the moment where power stopped being a tool and started being the only thing left. I remember the ash pouring off me thick enough to blot out what's left of the sunset. I remember the corrupted thing finally staggering back for the first time in the entire fight. And I remember choosing, in that one burning second, not to let the class decide what happens next. That's the difference, I realize, standing there with everything in me screaming to keep going, to let the power take over completely and finish this the easy way. The Ashen King let the class consume him because he never drew a line. I draw one. I pull back just enough to stay myself, funnel everything I have left into one final strike instead of an endless one, and drive it straight through the crown still fused into the thing's skull. The corrupted thing doesn't scream. It just stops, all at once, crumbling into ash that scatters into the widening fracture behind it. And with the crown destroyed, whatever was keeping the rift unstable finally settles enough for the sealing artifact to actually take hold. The hollow rift closes for the first time in 17 years. Celine is already stirring by the time I get to her, bruised badly but alive, and the relief that hits me when she opens her eyes is honestly more overwhelming than anything the fight itself put me through. I had no idea before that moment how much it would wreck me to almost lose her. That's a problem for another day. We make it back to the capital 4 days later, exhausted, injured, and carrying proof that the hollow rift, an active threat the crown had quietly failed to contain for nearly 2 decades, has been sealed by a 17-year-old the council was preparing to strip of his power out of fear. Instructor Halvane's witnesses, 3 independent scholars with no ties to the Voss family, confirm every detail. The council has no choice but to walk back the confiscation petition, at least publicly, at least for now. The council session itself is worse than anything the rift threw at me, and I say that having just fought a corrupted 400-year-old warlord's remains. The chamber is packed, nobles in their finest robes crowded into the galleries, like this is entertainment instead of a decision about whether I get to keep existing as myself. Bastion's father stands at the center of the floor, presenting his case with the kind of practiced calm that only comes from someone who has never once lost an argument in this room in his life. The boy sealed one rift, he says, voice carrying easily through the chamber without needing to raise it. That does not undo 400 years of precedent. That does not undo the fact that his class, by the Crown's own historical record, has a 100% failure rate when left unbound past the age of 20. We are not debating whether he is dangerous. We are debating whether we wait until he proves it the hard way. I stand there in front of the entire council, exhausted, bruised, still smelling faintly of ash and rift corrosion, and for one long, terrible second I genuinely believe he's going to win. Halvane's scholars present their evidence. Sarah and 2 other guild adventurers testify about the Eastern District incident. None of it seems to matter against a man who spent 30 years learning exactly how to make a room agree with him. Then Celine stands up from the gallery, uninvited, unsummoned, and every noble in that chamber turns to look at a girl who technically has no legal standing to speak at all. I watched him choose to stop, she says, and her voice doesn't shake even a little. He, in the middle of the worst fight of his life, with every reason in the world to let the power take over completely, I watched him pull back on purpose because he decided that's not who he wanted to be. You're all so afraid of what the Ashen King became that you can't see the difference standing right in front of you. He isn't the warning, he's the answer to it. The chamber goes quiet in a way I've only heard once before. On that platform, right before the crystal cracked. The vote doesn't go entirely my way, not completely, because political rooms rarely give anyone a clean win, but it goes far enough. The council shelves the confiscation order pending a formal 6-month observation period, instead of ordering immediate seal binding, which means I keep the class, keep my life, and keep my freedom, provisionally, with eyes on me from every direction for half a year. It's not victory. It's survival with conditions attached, and after everything, I'll take it. Bastion's father doesn't take the loss quietly. Neither does Bastion. I should have known the story wasn't over just because I won one fight. It wasn't. If anything, it was only the beginning, because the same night the council votes to shelve the confiscation order, an anonymous letter arrives at the academy addressed directly to me, sealed with a crest I don't recognize, containing exactly one line. The Ashen King had allies once, and some of them never stopped waiting for his bloodline to wake up. Voss goes quiet again in my head, and this time it isn't sarcasm he's holding back. It's something closer to dread. There's more of them, he says slowly. Vessels, fragments, people who worshipped what I became instead of fearing it. If they know you're awake, they're not going to wait very long. I stood on that platform 2 weeks ago as the biggest failure the Academy had ever produced, and now I'm the last living thread connecting a 400-year-old catastrophe to whatever's coming next. Bastion's family wants me erased. The crown wants me controlled. And somewhere out there, people who worshipped a warlord I've never met are about to find out his bloodline finally has a heartbeat again. I go home that night instead of staying at the academy dormitory, mostly because I need to see my mother's face and know for certain that she's safe, and partly because some stubborn part of me still isn't ready to believe that whoever wrote that first letter actually knows where I live. I find out how wrong that assumption is the second I turn onto our street and see every lamp in our house dark except one, flickering unevenly in the window of my little sister's room. Mira is 11 years old. She has never once had anything to do with any of this. Not the awakening, not the class, not the council, not any of it. And the sight of that single unsteady light in her window turns my stomach into ice before I've even reached the door. I don't remember crossing the yard. I remember Voss's voice snapping to full alertness in my head, sharp and urgent in a way I haven't heard from him since the corrupted thing in the rift. Someone's inside, he says. Move. The front door's unlocked, which it never is. Not since my father died, and my mother started checking it twice every night out of habit. I go through it without slowing down, ash already curling off my knuckles before I've even decided to draw on the class. Some instinctive part of the power reacting to fear faster than I can think. My mother is in the hallway, pressed against the wall, perfectly still, eyes locked on the closed door to Mira's room, like looking away might make whatever's behind it worse. He's been in there 10 minutes, she whispers. He said if I made a sound, or if I tried to leave, he'd... She doesn't finish the sentence. She doesn't need to. I push the door open myself. The man standing in my little sister's room doesn't look like a warlord's loyalist should look, at least not in my head, where I'd been picturing something closer to a robed cultist from an old painting. He looks ordinary, middle-aged, plain traveling clothes, the kind of unremarkable face that could disappear into any market crowd in the capital without a second glance. Mira is sitting on her bed, frozen, eyes wide, and he's standing close enough beside her that I understand instantly this isn't a threat I can afford to rush. You didn't answer our first letter, he says calmly, like we're continuing a conversation instead of starting one. We assumed you needed a clearer demonstration of how much we already know about your life. Get away from her. My voice comes out steadier than I feel, which is honestly the only thing keeping me from losing control completely right there in the doorway. We don't want to hurt the girl, he says, and something about how casually he says it makes it worse, not better. We want to hurt you, eventually, if it comes to that. But preferably we'd rather not. What we want is much simpler. We want the vessel of the sovereign to come home to the people who still remember what he's capable of, instead of wasting that bloodline pretending to be an academy student. Voss goes cold and sharp in my head all at once. Don't listen to a word of the flattery, he warns. That's exactly how they talked to me 400 years ago, right before they convinced me the whole kingdom deserved to burn for what it did to people like us. I take one slow step into the room, hands open, ash curling lazily around my fingers, in a warning I don't bother hiding anymore. You have 5 seconds to walk away from my sister, I say, before I stop being polite about this. He smiles, and it's the smile of someone who has already decided he isn't leaving on his own terms, regardless of what I do next. You misunderstand, he says. I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to deliver a message, which I've now done, and to remind you that the next visit won't be nearly this gentle if you continue ignoring us. He raises one hand, almost lazily, and the air around him ripples with a corrosion that looks unsettlingly familiar. The same dark, decayed energy that clung to the crown thing in the rift. That's when the real problem started. because the second that energy flares, Mira flinches hard enough to fall backward off the bed, and every ounce of restraint I was holding on to snaps clean in half. I don't remember crossing the room. I remember my hand closing around his wrist before the corrosion fully forms, ash pouring off both of us at once, his decayed power and mine crashing into each other with a force that cracks the window behind him straight down the middle. He's strong, stronger than I expected from someone who looks this unremarkable, but he's not prepared for how much raw, desperate fuel I've got burning through me in this exact second. Every second of fear I just felt walking through that door converting instantly into something he clearly wasn't planning on facing tonight. He breaks free before I can finish whatever I was about to do, vaulting backward through the already cracked window in a single fluid motion that tells me this was never a fight he intended to actually have. Landing somewhere in the dark yard below, he calls back up through the broken glass, voice still infuriatingly calm. "You have more control than we expected," he says. "That's good. That's very good, actually. It means the invitation still stands. Come find us when you're ready to stop pretending this ordinary life means anything to you anymore." Then he's gone, over the back fence and into the night, and I'm left standing in my sister's wrecked bedroom with my mother sobbing in the doorway and Mira shaking so hard she can't get words out. And the only thought running through my head, over and over, is how close I came tonight to losing both of them because of a bloodline I never asked for, and a power I still barely understand. I should have known the letter wasn't the end of it. I should have known the moment Instructor Halvane's face went pale over that folder of burned records, that whatever I'd woken up wasn't going to let me have a normal life again. Not now, maybe not ever. We spend that night with the Academy's emergency guard posted outside the house, arranged through an emergency message to Halvane that gets answered faster than I expect, which tells me she's been expecting something like this longer than she's let on. Mira eventually falls asleep curled against our mother on the couch, refusing to go back into her own room, and I sit up the rest of the night by the broken window, watching the yard, waiting for a second visit that doesn't come, not yet. Celine arrives just after sunrise, having heard secondhand through the Academy grapevine that something happened at my house overnight, and the look on her face when she sees the cracked window and my mother's exhausted, hollow expression tells me she understands immediately how bad it actually was. Celine finds me staring at that first letter, long after everyone else has gone to sleep, exhaustion finally catching up with both of us in the quiet aftermath. "Whatever this is," she says quietly, sitting down next to me without waiting for an invitation. "You're not doing it alone this time. I already told you that once. And I meant it then too, in case you were hoping I'd forgotten." I almost laugh, despite everything, despite the cracked window down the hall and my mother finally asleep out of sheer exhaustion, and my little sister still flinching at every creak in the house. "Almost. You realize what you're signing up for," I say. "This isn't going away. Whatever this is, whoever these people actually are, they know where I live, they know who I care about, and apparently they're patient enough to wait 400 years for a chance to finish what the Ashen King started. That's not a small thing to attach yourself to. I know exactly what I'm signing up for," she says, and there's no hesitation in it at all. "I signed up for it the second I got on a horse and chased you halfway to a rift that was actively trying to kill everyone near it. This isn't new information, Riven. I'm just done pretending I didn't already decide." Voss, mercifully quiet through most of the conversation, finally speaks up in my head, and for once there's no sarcasm in it at all. "For what it's worth," he says, "the vessels before you who lasted longest were never the ones who tried to carry this alone. That's not weakness. I wish someone had told me that, back when it might have mattered. It's the closest thing to real advice he's given me since this whole nightmare started, and coming from him, of all people, it lands harder than I expect. I want to believe, sitting there in the exhausted, fragile quiet of a night that almost ended so much worse than it did, that this is the part where things finally settle, where the council's observation period turns into something less like surveillance and more like acceptance, where Bastion's family gives up the fight they can't seem to win no matter how hard they push, where the ordinary loyalists, whoever they actually are underneath that unremarkable stranger's face, decide I'm not worth the trouble and go back into whatever 400-year hiding place they crawled out of. I want to believe that. Some stubborn, exhausted, 17-year-old part of me almost does. That's exactly when the second letter arrives. It comes through the same window that's already cracked from last night, Glass scattering across the floor as something small and fast buries itself into the wall, with enough force to make both of us flinch back instantly. Celine's hand already glowing faintly with her own clasp before either of us has time to think. It isn't paper folded around a rock this time. It's a blade, thin and black, made from the exact same corroded metal that clung to the crown thing I destroyed in the rift, still faintly smoking where it's embedded in the plaster. Pinned beneath it is a single sheet of parchment, and the handwriting on it is different from the first letter entirely. Sharper, more deliberate, like whoever wrote this one wanted me to notice the difference. I pull it free with hands that are steadier than they have any right to be after the night I've just had, and I read it once, then again, because the first time doesn't feel real. It isn't a threat. It isn't a warning this time, not the way the man in Mira's room delivered one last night. It's an address, a date 3 days from now, and a single line beneath both, that I read out loud to Celine because I need to hear it in my own voice before I let myself fully believe it. Come alone, or don't come at all, and find out exactly what you were born to become. Voss goes utterly silent in my head, and this time, the silence isn't dread. It's something closer to recognition, like he already knows exactly what waits at that address, and isn't sure yet whether he wants to tell me. Celine reads it over my shoulder, and for a long moment, neither of us says anything at all. Then she looks at me, steady despite everything, and says the only thing that actually matters right now. You're not going alone. I fold the letter once, slide it into my pocket next to the first one, and stare out through the broken window at a capital that thinks it already knows the worst of what I am. It has no idea. 3 days from now, whatever's waiting at that address is going to find out exactly how wrong that assumption is. One way or another, it's an invitation. I intend to answer it,